Introduction: Escaping Death. Into death. The ocean has no mercy for the weak. But the jungle? The jungle recognizes no laws at all. From the heart of the violent storm that swallowed everything, and from the burning wreckage of a ship consumed by the fires of fate, a man and a woman of English nobility emerged, holding in their arms a tiny bundle, a newborn infant who did not yet realize that his very first cry in this world was the announcement of a bloody, unforgiving epic. Here, on this deserted African shore, where the colossal trees intertwine to completely block out the sunlight, and where secrets are buried the moment they are born, the parents stood, staring at the vast green unknown stretching before them. Did they truly survive death by drowning? Or had they walked with their own feet into a different kind of hell? With primitive tools, driven by the sheer terror of losing their child, the parents built a wooden cabin suspended high between the branches of a giant tree. A cabin they believed would be a fortress protecting them from the beasts of the wild. But they forgot that the jungle has eyes watching from the dark, eyes that know absolutely no mercy. The other side of the jungle, Kala's tragedy. Only a few miles away from that cabin, life was beating to a completely different rhythm within the guerrilla troop. There, motherhood was manifesting in its most beautiful instinctive form through Kala, a gentle, devoted female guerrilla whose eyes overflowed with pure tenderness as she cradled her tiny infant, the sole joy and purpose of her life. He would hold onto her fur, play, and explore the world in safety under the shadow of his stern father and leader of the troop, Kerchak, a massive silver-backed alpha male, a powerful and grave commander who placed the safety of the family and the laws of the jungle far above any emotional consideration. But tranquility in this jungle is nothing more than a brief illusion, a fleeting moment of peace between two tragedies. On a dark night, ruled by an eerie, suffocating silence, the yellow phantom of death slipped from the shadows, the fierce, spotted leopard Sabor, the most terrifying and ruthless jaw in this entire wilderness. With a swift, blinding strike, and while everyone was fast asleep, Sabor snatched the tiny infant straight from Kala's arms. The screams dissolved into the darkness of the night, and a profound grief consumed the troop. The mother's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and her warm world turned to ash. Kerchak, despite his deep hardness and grief, knew the law of the jungle all too well. The weak die, and the family must move on. But Kala could not surrender to this brutal, shocking law. Her soul was bleeding, searching desperately for any shred of hope to restore her stolen motherhood. The lost cry. The next morning, while a heavy shroud of grief hung over the migrating troop, Kala's ears caught a strange, unnatural sound. It wasn't the sound of an ape, nor the song of a bird, nor the roar of a savage beast. It was a frail, pleading cry, filtering through the depths of the dense, wet jungle. Her wounded maternal instinct drove her toward the source of the sound, completely ignoring Kerchak's stern warnings or the mortal dangers of the path. She was leaping through the branches, tracking that thin, fragile thread of life, until she found herself standing before that bizarre human structure, the suspended wooden cabin. Kala climbed with extreme caution, her heart racing against her ribs with every single step. A terrifying tomb-like silence ruled the air. She pushed the wooden door slowly, only to have a silent, tragic scene open up before her eyes. Deep claw marks tore through the walls, splattered blood stained the floor, and clothing was ripped to shreds. The leopard Sabor had visited this place before her, and he left nothing behind but utter destruction. The English parents were gone forever, but in the dark corner of the room, beneath a torn blanket, something moved. Kala stepped back and held her breath. Wonder, fear, utter confusion? What could possibly be hiding beneath that cloth? She extended her trembling hand with extreme slowness to lift the veil, revealing a tiny human child without fur, without protection, shivering from the cold and the terror. Suddenly their eyes met. Two wide human eyes filled with tears stared into the brown, sorrowful eyes of a grieving gorilla searching for her son. And in that exact second, time stopped. Suddenly, this magical silence was shattered by the sound of snapping branches and heavy, rapid footsteps approaching the cabin. It was him. Sabor the leopard had returned to finish his meal. The battle in the canopy. Death had returned to the scene of the crime. Through the shattered wooden window of the cabin, the yellow phantom slithered back inside. Sabor, the leopard's eyes, burning with a predatory green fire, locked instantly onto Carla, and the tiny human prize cradled against her chest. In that split second, Kayla didn't see an apex predator. She saw the merciless murderer of her first child. She didn't run. Driven by a primal, fierce maternal rage, she slammed her heavy frame directly against the beast. The cabin became a claustrophobic arena of pure chaos. Claw against fist. Fury against hunger. Sabor lunged, his razor-sharp teeth snapping inches from Carla's face, tearing through the wooden fabrics of the room. Carla wrestled the predator with immense strength, using the heavy, foreign English furniture to block the deadly strikes, all while shielding the crying infant with her own body. With a desperate final surge of energy, Kayla managed to shove Sabor into a heavy wooden trunk and secure the latch. It would only hold the beast for a few seconds, but in the jungle, a few seconds is the definitive line between life and death. Kayla grabbed the infant, dove out of the shattered window and threw herself into the open air of the jungle canopy. The escape, sliding through the green abyss. What followed was a breathtaking, death-defying chase through the heavens of the jungle. Kayla fled through the treetops, leaping from branch to vine, her arms locked securely around the human baby. Behind her, Sabor was a blur of yellow lightning, breaking through the cabin walls, navigating the branches with terrifying agility, and gaining ground with every leap. The rain-slicked moss made every surface a deadly gamble. Kayla lost her footing, slipping off a massive branch. For a terrifying moment, they fell through the green abyss, until her hand caught a thick, swinging vine. Using her momentum, she swung across a massive gorge, landing heavily on the thick roots of a giant banyan tree. Sabor lunged through the air after them, his claws missing Carla's heel by a mere hair's breadth, before gravity took him, sending the heavy predator crashing down through the lower canopy. Silence fell over the jungle once more. Kayla sat in the shadows of the massive tree, her chest heaving, gasping for air. She looked down at the bundle in her arms. The baby was shivering, terrified but completely unharmed. They had survived the phantom. The judgment of the Alpha. Carla carried the human infant back to the heart of the gorilla troop. As she stepped into the clearing, the peaceful chatter of the family died down instantly. Total, suffocating silence. The gorillas gathered in a massive circle, their eyes wide with confusion, fear, and deep suspicion. What was this hairless, strange creature? The crowd parted as a colossal shadow fell over Carla. It was her mate, Kerchak, the giant silverback leader whose presence radiated absolute unyielding authority. He looked down at the tiny human baby, his eyes hardening into a cold, protective glare. Kerchak took a heavy step forward, looming over them like a mountain. He shook his head slowly, a low, warning rumble vibrating from his chest. To him, this creature was not a baby. It was a representative of the most dangerous species on the planet. It was a direct threat to the safety of his family. A silent, tense battle of wills began between the two mates. Kerchak's rigid posture demanded the removal of the threat, while Kala's defiant eyes, holding the baby closer to her chest, made a silent vow. I am not letting him go. The entire troop held their breath. Wonder, fear, expectation? Will the Alpha enforce the brutal, unyielding law of isolation and force her to abandon the child? Or will he yield to the desperate, bleeding plea of a mother who had already lost too much? A heavy, unresolved tension hung in the air as Kerchak slowly turned his back to Kala, walking away into the thick morning fog, leaving his heavy judgment completely unspoken, yet felt by everyone. A mother's vow, the naming of Tarzan. Kerchak had made his decree without speaking a single word. The creature could stay for now, but he would never be a son to him. He would never truly be recognized as part of the family. But Kala did not care about the cold distance of the leader. She looked down at the tiny, fragile being in her arms. He was breathing softly now, his small, smooth hand reaching up to grasp her thick, dark fur. He was searching for warmth, searching for an identity in a world that had already rejected him. Shh! I am here, Kala whispered with her eyes, cradling him against her heart. You are safe now. She looked at his pale, hairless skin, so radically different from the dark, thick coats of the gorillas. A name echoed from the ancient instinct of her soul. A word from the jungle's silent tongue. Tarzan, she named him. In the primitive language of the great apes, it meant white skin. It was not just a name, it was a defiant vow. A promise that against all odds, against the brutal laws of nature, and against the heavy disapproval of the entire troop, this human boy would survive. The mirror of nature, the struggle to fit in. Time in the jungle is measured not by clocks, but by the changing of the seasons and the growth of the young. As the months bled into years, Tarzan grew from a helpless infant into a chaotic, energetic toddler. But with growth came a profound, heartbreaking realization. Tarzan began to look at his reflection in the still, clear jungle pools. What did he see? He saw a creature with no fur, a creature that could not walk on all fours without scraping his knees, a creature whose hands were weak and whose teeth were small. He would watch his adoptive peers leap effortlessly across massive gaps in the canopy, while he would misjudge the distance, slip, and crash heavily into the mud below. Why? The boy's silent tears would ask. Why am I the only one who looks like this? He tried desperately to mimic them. He would cover his face with thick mud to look darker. He would beat his chest and let out a tiny, high-pitched roar, only to be met with the confusion or indifference of the older apes. Kerchak would pass by, his massive shadow looming, his cold eyes looking down at the boy's clumsy failures with silent validation of his doubts. He will never be one of us. Yet, where his anatomy failed him, a relentless, unbreakable human spirit took over. If he could not climb like a gorilla, he would learn to climb differently. If his arms were not long enough, he would use his intellect to adapt. The emergence, the jungle's new force. Years passed, and the clumsy toddler faded into the shadows of the past. Nature, in all its harshness, had carved and sculpted the boy's fragile frame. The relentless climbing, the falls, the constant struggle against the elements had turned his soft body into a masterpiece of lean muscle, agility, and raw power. He no longer walked on all fours. He moved through the trees like a creature born of the wind itself. On a high, misty cliff overlooking the vast, endless canopy of the African continent, A figure stepped out from the shadows of the ancient trees.